The dust from the stagecoach hadn't even settled when Penelope Harper stepped onto the wooden planks of Truckee, California. Her dark traveling dress, already collecting the grime of this rough mountain town in the year 1878. She carried only a small carpet bag, and the weight of secrets she prayed no one would ever need to know. Secrets that had driven her from San Francisco to this remote place where the railroad and timber industries brought rough men seeking fortune and forgetting. The September air bit cold this high in the Sierra Nevada, and Penelope pulled her shawl tighter as she surveyed the main street. Saloons outnumbered respectable establishments 3-1, but she had expected as much. Her aunt's letter had been clear about the nature of Truckee, a town that had sprung up along the transcontinental railroad route and now thrived on logging and vice in equal measure. What her aunt hadn't mentioned was that she'd passed away 2 months before Penelope's arrival, a fact the local banker delivered with uncomfortable efficiency when she inquired at his office an hour after stepping off that coach. "Miss Harper, I'm afraid your Aunt Martha succumbed to pneumonia in July," the banker said, adjusting his spectacles. "However, she left you her property, the boarding house on Mill Street. It's been closed since her passing, but the building is sound." Penelope's heart sank. She had counted on her aunt's guidance, her presence, her understanding. Now she was alone in a strange town with a building she didn't know how to run and exactly $43 to her name. But she had faced worse than uncertainty. She had faced the cold rejection of a man who had courted her for 6 months, who had spoken of marriage and children and a future, only to withdraw every promise when she confessed the truth a doctor had told her years before. That memory still burned like a fresh brand. "I'll manage," she said, lifting her chin. "May I have the keys?" The boarding house needed work. The rooms were dusty, the furniture draped in sheets like ghosts, but the structure was solid and the location was good. Penelope spent 3 days scrubbing floors and washing windows and airing out mattresses. She used 15 of her precious dollars to place an advertisement in the local newspaper and to buy supplies. By the 4th day, she had her first boarder, a quiet mining engineer named Mr. Peterson, who paid a week in advance and asked only for clean sheets and hot coffee in the morning. She was sweeping the front porch on her 8th morning in Truckee when she first saw Quincy Thompson. He rode a roan horse that looked as tired as its rider, dust coating both man and beast from what must have been a long journey. But it was his face that caught her attention, the way exhaustion couldn't quite hide the strong lines of his jaw or the startling blue of his eyes when he looked up at her boarding house sign. He dismounted with the careful movements of someone whose body ached, then approached the porch. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of beard growth. His clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy or ranch hand, though his gun belt was well maintained and his boots, despite their coating of dust, were good quality. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You have rooms available?" "I do," Penelope replied. $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper, extra for laundry. "I'll take a room for a month if you'll have me." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out bills, counting them carefully. "I'll be working at the Thompson Ranch, delivering horses we bought down in Nevada." "I'm Quincy Thompson." "Your family's ranch?" she asked, taking the money. "My brother's ranch," he corrected, and something in his tone suggested a complicated story. "I've been away for some years, working cattle drives, breaking horses wherever the work took me. But my brother wrote asking for help with a big contract, so here I am." Penelope showed him to the largest room on the 2nd floor, the one with windows facing the mountains. He set his saddlebags down with a weary sigh and turned to her with a genuine smile that transformed his tired face into something warmer. "Thank you, Miss Harper. Penelope Harper. Thank you, Miss Harper. This is exactly what I needed." Over the following days, Quincy proved to be an ideal boarder. He was quiet and respectful, always prompt for meals, and often helped with small repairs around the house without being asked. Penelope found herself looking forward to breakfast, when her 3 current boarders would gather in the dining room and conversation would flow. Quincy had a way of telling stories about his years on the trail that made even Mr. Peterson laugh, and his manners were impeccable despite his rough profession. "You've done wonders with this place," Quincy said one morning after the other boarders had left for their work. He was helping her clear the table, something he'd started doing naturally. "Your aunt would be proud. You knew my aunt. Met her a few times when I was younger before I left Truckee. She was kind to me once when I needed it." He paused, stacking plates carefully. "I was sorry to hear of her passing. I never got to see her again," Penelope said quietly. "I wish I'd come sooner." "Why didn't you?" The question was gentle, curious rather than prying. Penelope considered deflecting, but there was something in Quincy's open expression that invited honesty. "I was engaged, or I thought I was. It fell apart rather suddenly, and I needed to leave San Francisco." "His loss," Quincy said simply, and the conviction in those 2 words made her look up sharply. He met her gaze steadily. "Any man who'd let you go is a fool." Heat rose in her cheeks, and she busied herself with the dishes to hide her confusion. She barely knew this man, yet his words affected her more than months of practiced courtship from her former fiancé ever had. The next week brought a cold snap that dusted the peaks with early snow. Penelope's boarding house had filled to capacity with 6 rooms occupied, and she found herself working from dawn until well past dark. Quincy often returned from the ranch after supper, but he always saved her a portion and would find her in the kitchen, insisting she sit and eat while he told her about his day. "My brother's worried about this contract," Quincy said one evening as she finally sat down with a plate of stew. "He needs to deliver 30 trained horses to a cattle operation down in the valley by November, but half of them are still green. That's why he asked me back. I've got a touch with difficult horses, apparently." "Apparently," Penelope smiled. "You don't agree?" "I think horses are like people. They just need someone to listen to what they're trying to say." He leaned back in his chair, watching her eat. "You look exhausted, Miss Harper. You're working too hard. The boarding house won't run itself. You could hire help." "That girl who works at the general store, Sarah, she mentioned she's looking for additional employment." Penelope shook her head. "I can't afford to hire anyone yet. Perhaps after winter when I've built up more savings." Quincy frowned but didn't press the issue. Instead, he started arriving back earlier in the evenings, helping with whatever needed doing. He'd chop wood for the stoves, carry in supplies, even assist with meal preparation despite her protests. The other boarders began following his example, and suddenly running the house became manageable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him one night when they were alone in the kitchen, him drying dishes while she washed. "Doing what?" "Helping so much. You pay for your room, you don't owe me extra labor." Quincy set down the dish towel and turned to face her directly. "Maybe I like your company, maybe I think you deserve help, maybe I'm selfish and want to see you smile instead of looking so worn down." He paused. "Or maybe all 3. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Quincy, I don't think." "I'm not asking you to think anything," he said gently. "I'm just being honest about why I do what I do." October arrived with a week of rain that turned the streets to mud and kept everyone indoors more than usual. Penelope found herself spending more time with Quincy. their conversations deepening as they sat in the parlor while rain drummed on the roof. He told her about growing up in Truckee, about the fight with his brother that had sent him wandering for 8 years, about the loneliness of the trail and the freedom of it too. She found herself sharing more than she'd planned, talking about her childhood in Sacramento, her parents' deaths from influenza when she was 17, the years working as a seamstress in San Francisco. She skated around the failed engagement, and Quincy didn't push, though she saw curiosity in his eyes. "You plan to keep wandering after this contract is finished?" she asked one evening. Quincy was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire in the hearth. "I used to think wandering was what I wanted. Freedom, no ties, no expectations. But lately I've been thinking maybe I was just running from something instead of toward anything. And now," he looked at her then, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Now I think I might have found something worth staying for." Before she could respond, Mr. Peterson came downstairs asking about extra blankets, and the moment passed. But that night, lying in her bed, Penelope couldn't stop thinking about Quincy's words or the way her heart had responded to them. She was terrified. The thought of opening herself to someone again, of facing that inevitable conversation and the rejection that would follow, made her want to retreat behind walls she'd carefully constructed. But Quincy was different from her former fiancé. He was genuine where Charles had been calculating, kind where Charles had been conditional, present where Charles had been distant. The next morning, she found Quincy on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. She brought him coffee, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "Penelope," he said finally, using her first name for the first time, "I'd like permission to court you properly." Her stomach dropped. "Quincy, I don't think that's wise." "Why not?" He turned to face her. "And please don't tell me you don't feel what's between us. I know you do." "It's not about feelings." She set her coffee cup down with trembling hands. "There are things you don't know about me." "Then tell me." "I can't have children." The words burst out of her, sharp and painful. "A doctor confirmed it years ago. I'm barren, Quincy. That's why my engagement ended. When I told Charles, he said he couldn't marry someone who couldn't give him heirs, who couldn't fulfill a wife's basic duty." She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see his expression change from warmth to disappointment. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awful. Then Quincy's hand cupped her chin gently, tilting her face up until she had to meet his eyes. What she saw there wasn't disappointment or rejection. It was anger, but not at her. "That man was a fool," Quincy said fiercely. "And cruel besides, to make you think your worth is tied to childbearing. Most men want families, want sons to carry on their names. I'm not most men." His thumb brushed her cheek softly. "Penelope, I've spent 8 years alone thinking I was content with it. Then I met you and everything changed. You're smart and strong and beautiful, and the way you've built a life here from nothing amazes me. If you tell me you can't have children, then we won't have children. But that doesn't make you less. It doesn't make me want you any less." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You say that now, but later, when you see other men with their sons, when your brother's children are running around, then I'll be grateful I have you," he said simply. "Penelope, I'm not asking you to give me children. I'm asking if you'll let me build a life with you, whatever that life looks like, just us, if that's how it is. You're enough. More than enough. Quincy." She was crying in earnest now, years of pain and shame releasing in great sobs. He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring reassurances. When she finally calmed, he wiped her tears with his bandana and said, "So, may I court you properly?" She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "Yes. Yes, you may." The next month was the happiest Penelope had ever known. Quincy courted her with a patience and tenderness that made her fall deeper in love with each passing day. He brought her wildflowers from the mountain meadows, even as autumn turned them scarce. He took her riding on his days off, showing her the beauty of the high country. He kissed her for the first time under a golden aspen tree, and she felt like she was finally, truly home. They kept their courtship relatively private, not hiding but not announcing it either. The other boarders noticed and smiled knowingly, but respected their privacy. Mr. Peterson moved out at the end of October, his work completed, and Quincy helped Penelope interview potential new boarders. "You're a natural at this," she told him one evening. "You read people well." "I've met enough characters on the trail to spot trouble," he said. "That last fellow, the one who couldn't meet your eyes, he would have been a problem." In early November, Quincy's brother Robert came to the boarding house for supper. Penelope had worried about meeting him, knowing the brothers' relationship was complicated, but Robert greeted her warmly and treated Quincy with genuine affection. "I'm glad you're staying," Robert said as they finished the meal. "The ranch needs you and Truckee needs you. It's past time you came home." "I'm thinking about it," Quincy admitted, "but I need to build something of my own, not just work for you." "The north section," Robert said immediately. "It's good grazing land and there's a decent spot for a house near the creek. I'll sell it to you for a fair price, or you can work it off training horses. Lord knows we get enough requests." Quincy looked at Penelope. "What do you think?" The fact that he asked her, that her opinion mattered in his decisions, warmed her deeply. "I think you should do what makes you happy." "Then I should stay here with you," he said, and Robert grinned. That night, after Robert left and the other boarders had retired, Quincy and Penelope sat in the parlor. He took her hand, his expression serious. "I know we've only been courting a month," he said. "And by all rights, I should wait longer. But I'm 30 years old, Penelope, and I've never been surer of anything in my life. I love you. I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old with you. Will you be my wife?" Penelope's heart soared, but old fears rose too. "Quincy, I need you to really think about this. About what it means not having children. Other people will ask questions, will pity you, will say cruel things. Let them talk," he said firmly. "Their opinions don't matter, only ours do. Only what we build between us matters." He squeezed her hand. "I don't need children to make my life complete, Penelope. I need you, just you. You're enough for me, more than enough." "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted, "but I'll get you one, something beautiful." "I don't need a fancy ring, I just need you." "Nevertheless," he smiled, "we'll go to the jeweler tomorrow." They planned a simple wedding for early December, giving Quincy time to complete the horse contract and finalize the land purchase from his brother. Penelope arranged for Sarah from the general store to help run the boarding house during the ceremony and the few days after, finally taking Quincy's advice about hiring assistants. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy and joyful. Quincy moved out of the boarding house temporarily to observe propriety, staying at his brother's ranch, but he visited daily. They made plans for their future, deciding that Penelope would keep running the boarding house while Quincy established his horse training business. Eventually, they might build a house on his new land, but for now, the boarding house would be their home. "It's unconventional," Penelope said one evening as they reviewed their plans. "A married woman running a boarding house with her husband." "So we'll be unconventional," Quincy replied. "We're writing our own story, remember? No one else's expectations matter." 3 days before the wedding, Penelope sat down with Quincy in the boarding house parlor for a serious conversation. The evening was cold, frost coating the windows, but the fire kept the room warm. I need to tell you again, she said. About children, about what it means. I need you to really hear it before we stand in front of that preacher. Quincy set down his coffee and gave her his full attention. I'm listening. There will be no sons to teach your trade, she said, forcing herself to speak each hard truth. No daughters to bounce on your knee, no grandchildren growing old. When we're gone, there will be no one carrying our name forward. Your brother's children might visit and we can love them, but they won't be ours. There will be empty rooms in any house we build. People will whisper about us, pity us, tell you that you made a mistake marrying a barren woman. Her voice broke on the last words, but she pressed on. I need to know you won't regret this. That 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you won't look at me with resentment for what I can't give you. Quincy was quiet for a long moment, and fear coiled in Penelope's stomach. Then he moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. Penelope Harper, he said, his voice steady and sure. I hear every word you're saying. I understand what you're telling me, and my answer remains the same. I don't want children if having them means not having you. I don't want any future that doesn't have you at the center of it. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You keep talking about what you can't give me, but you're not seeing what you do give me. You give me home. You give me purpose. You make me laugh and challenge me to be better. You see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. That's worth more than a dozen children. But later, we'll have each other, he said firmly. We'll have this boarding house full of interesting people. We'll have horses and land and a life we built together. And yes, maybe we'll love Robert's children and help raise them, be the aunt and uncle they adore. Maybe we'll take in a child who needs a home someday if we want to. Or maybe it will be just us, and that will be exactly right. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm not saying this won't be without challenges. People can be cruel and there will be hard days. But those hard days won't be because I regret marrying you. They'll be from dealing with people who don't understand what we have, and we'll face those days together. You really mean it, she whispered. It wasn't a question anymore. I really mean it. Penelope, you are enough. You have always been enough. Your worth isn't in your womb. It's in your heart, your strength, your spirit. I'm marrying you, all of you, exactly as you are. He smiled. So please, stop trying to talk me out of the best decision I've ever made. She laughed through fresh tears and pulled him up, kissing him with all the love and gratitude overwhelming her heart. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, she said. I love you so much. I love you too. Now, can we please focus on getting married instead of all the reasons we shouldn't? Yes, she agreed. Yes, let's do that. The wedding took place on December 5th in the small church at the edge of Truckee, with snow falling gently outside. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Quincy wore a new suit, his dark hair finally trimmed, looking so handsome her breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. Robert stood as Quincy's best man, and Sarah served as Penelope's attendant. The church was half full with boarders past and present, townspeople who had come to know Penelope, and ranch hands from the Thompsons spread. It was small but warm, exactly what they both wanted. The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Matthews, smiled at them both. Marriage is a sacred covenant, he began. A joining not just of bodies but of souls, of lives, of futures. Quincy Thompson, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts you? I do, Quincy said, his voice strong and sure, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face. And do you, Penelope Harper, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts you? I do, Penelope said, tears of joy streaming down her face. They exchanged simple gold bands, and when the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Penelope felt like she was floating. The celebration afterward took place at the boarding house, with a meal prepared by Sarah and several other women from town. There was fiddle music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Robert gave a heartfelt speech about how glad he was to have his brother home and what a fine woman Quincy had chosen. Sarah cried happy tears and hugged Penelope tightly. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Quincy swept Penelope into his arms and carried her up the stairs to what was now their private room, the one she'd first shown him 3 months before. He set her down gently, and they stood facing each other in the lamplight. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson," he said softly. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," she replied, her heart racing. He reached out and slowly began removing the pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy," he promised. "You already do," she said, reaching up to cup his face. "You already do." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a joining not just of bodies but of hearts fully committed to each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking quietly until sleep claimed them both. The winter that followed was cold but joyful. Quincy split his time between training horses and helping with the boarding house, while Penelope managed their home with increasing ease now that Sarah helped 3 days a week. They settled into married life with surprising smoothness, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Some things were harder than others. In February, one of the boarders, a young couple, announced they were expecting their first child. Penelope congratulated them genuinely, but that night she cried in Quincy's arms, grieving for something she would never experience. "It's all right to be sad," Quincy said, holding her close. "You can feel that loss and still be happy with our life. Both things can be true." "Do you ever feel sad about it?" she asked. He was quiet, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "When I see Robert's son learning to ride, I wonder what teaching our own child would be like. But then I think about coming home to you every evening, about building this life without the exhaustion and expense of raising children, about all the time we have just for each other, and I'm content." "More than content. I worry I'm selfish," Penelope confessed. "Part of me is relieved we won't have children. Pregnancy terrifies me, and I've seen how it changes women's lives, limits them. But then I feel guilty for that relief." "You're not selfish," Quincy said firmly. "You're honest. And there's nothing wrong with being relieved about something you never wanted anyway. If you could have children, would you want them?" Penelope thought carefully. "I don't know. Maybe one if circumstances were different, but it was never a deep longing for me. Mostly I just felt deficient because Charles made me believe I was." "Then let that guilt go," Quincy said. "We're living the life we want, not the life others expect us to want. That's not selfishness. That's wisdom." As spring arrived, and the snow melted from the high country, Quincy's horse training business flourished. He had a natural gift that drew clients from all over the territory, and soon he was making good money. They discussed building a house on his land, but decided to wait another year, enjoying the simplicity of their current arrangement. In April, a young woman named Clara arrived at the boarding house, clearly pregnant and desperate. She was barely 18, alone and terrified. Penelope recognized that fear from her own desperate days, though for different reasons, and immediately offered her a room at reduced rates. "Where's the father?" Quincy asked quietly that evening. "Dead," she says. "Mining accident. His family wants nothing to do with her." Penelope stirred the stew absently. "She has nowhere to go." Then she stays here as long as she needs, Quincy said without hesitation. We'll help however we can. Over the following months, they became Clara's support system. Penelope taught her skills to earn money once the baby came, while Quincy made sure she had everything she needed. When Clara went into labor in July, Penelope was there, helping the midwife, holding Clara's hand through the painful hours. When the baby boy was born, healthy and squalling, Clara looked at Penelope with exhausted gratitude. "I want to name him Quinn," she said. "After your husband, who's been so kind." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "He'll be honored." Quincy was indeed honored, and he took his role as the boy's honorary uncle seriously. But he never expressed regret that the child wasn't his own, never looked at Clara with envy or resentment. He simply helped where he could and then came home to Penelope each night, content with what they had. "You're a good man, Quincy Thompson," Penelope told him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I'm a man who knows what he has," he replied, pulling her close. "And what I have is everything I need." That autumn, Robert's wife died suddenly from a fever, leaving him with 3 young children to raise alone. Robert was devastated, barely functional, and Quincy immediately stepped in to help. For 2 months, Penelope and Quincy essentially moved to the ranch, caring for the children while Robert grieved. "I don't know how to do this alone," Robert said one night after the children were finally asleep. "How do I raise 3 children without her?" "You're not alone," Quincy said firmly. "We're here. Family helps family." During those months, Penelope discovered she was better with children than she'd thought. She found herself enjoying reading to Robert's daughter, teaching his oldest son to bake bread, rocking the baby when he couldn't sleep. And yet, at the end of each day, she was exhausted and relieved to know she could return to her own quiet life eventually. "You're wonderful with them," Quincy observed one night. "I love them," Penelope agreed. "But I'm also grateful they're not ours to raise full-time. Is that terrible?" "No," he said. "It's honest. You can love children and still not want the responsibility of raising them. Those are different things." When Robert finally found his footing and they returned to their boarding house, Penelope felt the truth of her own heart clearly. She loved being an aunt. She loved helping Clara with baby Quinn and stepping in for Robert's children when needed. But she also loved returning to her own home, her own rhythm, her own life with Quincy. "I think I finally understand," she told Quincy one evening. "I'm not deficient for not wanting children. I'm just different, and that's all right." "More than all right," he said, kissing her forehead. "It's perfect because it's authentic." As their second anniversary approached, Penelope realized she was happier than she'd ever imagined possible. The boarding house was thriving, with a steady stream of respectable tenants. Quincy's business was booming, his reputation bringing clients from as far as Sacramento. They'd become pillars of the community, known for their kindness and reliability. There were still hard moments. At a church social, an older woman made a pointed comment about their childless state being such a shame. Quincy had stepped in smoothly, saying, "We're quite content with our life, Mrs. Peterson, but thank you for your concern." The steel in his voice made the woman retreat quickly. "Does that bother you?" Penelope asked later. "The comments, the assumptions." "Only because they bother you," he said. "People who judge us for living differently don't deserve our energy." In the spring of 1881, 3 years after Penelope had first arrived in Truckee, they finally built their house on Quincy's land. It was modest but beautiful, with large windows facing the mountains and a wraparound porch perfect for summer evenings. They moved in during May, and Penelope felt like she was stepping into a dream. "Should we keep the boarding house?" she asked as they unpacked. "You want to," Quincy countered. She considered. I think so, yes. Sarah's been managing it mostly for the past 6 months anyway, and it provides good income. But I like having it as an option, something that's ours. Then we keep it, he said simply. Their new home became a gathering place for family and friends. Robert's children visited often, running wild on the land and learning to ride with Quincy. Clara and Quinn came for Sunday dinners, the boy growing strong and clever. Sarah met a nice surveyor who boarded at the house and fell in love, eventually marrying him in a ceremony Penelope helped plan. Life developed a beautiful rhythm. Quincy would work with horses each day, while Penelope divided her time between the boarding house and their home, managing both with quiet efficiency. Evenings were theirs alone, spent reading by the fire, walking the property, making love, talking about everything and nothing. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked one night, 5 years into their marriage. They were lying in bed, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Marrying me, giving up the possibility of children," Quincy's arms tightened around her. "Not once, not for a single moment. Do you?" "No," she said, and realized it was completely true. "I used to think I was broken, that my inability to have children made me less than whole. But you showed me that wasn't true. I'm complete exactly as I am." "You are," he agreed. "You always were, Penelope. I just helped you see it." In 1883, a difficult situation arose that tested them both. A young girl of 15 showed up at their door, pregnant and fleeing an abusive home. She was terrified and alone, and Penelope didn't hesitate to take her in. But the girl's father arrived a week later, demanding his daughter back. "She's my property," he snarled, standing on their porch. "You got no right keeping her." "She's a human being, not property," Quincy said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And she's staying here where she's safe." The confrontation might have turned violent, but the sheriff arrived, called by Robert, who'd heard the yelling. After hearing the girl's story of abuse and the father's threats, the sheriff decided she could stay with Penelope and Quincy until the baby was born and she decided her own future. The girl, Marie, lived with them for 6 months. She was skittish and damaged, but slowly began to heal under their care. When her baby was born, a daughter, Marie made the difficult decision to give the child to a couple in Sacramento who desperately wanted to adopt. "I'm only 15, she said, tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter one last time. "I want her to have a real chance, a real family who can provide for her." Penelope held Marie as she sobbed, understanding the weight of impossible choices. Afterward, Marie stayed with them another year, learning skills and growing stronger before eventually moving to San Francisco to work in a dress shop. "We made a difference in her life," Quincy said after Marie left. "She's going to be all right. You think we should have done more?" Penelope asked. "Offered to raise the baby ourselves," Quincy shook his head. "That wasn't what either of us wanted, and it wasn't what was best for that child. She needed young parents ready to dedicate themselves to raising her. That's not us, and that's all right. We helped Marie in the ways we could, and that's enough." "You always know how to make things clear," Penelope said, grateful. As the years continued, their life together deepened into something profound and unshakable. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, economic downturns and personal losses. Robert remarried eventually, to a kind widow who loved his children as her own, and Quincy stood as his best man with genuine happiness for his brother. Clara met a blacksmith who adored both her and Quinn, and they married in a simple ceremony at the church. Penelope and Quincy gave Clara money to help furnish her new home, wanting to ensure she started her marriage on solid footing. "That was generous," Quincy said afterward. "She helped us when we needed it," Penelope replied. "Now we can return the favor." When Penelope turned 40, Quincy threw her a surprise party at the boarding house, inviting everyone whose lives they'd touched over the years. The building was packed with people, all sharing stories of how Penelope's kindness had helped them. She cried happy tears and held Quincy's hand throughout the evening. "I didn't know I'd affected so many people," she said later. "You underestimate your impact," Quincy said. "You always have." As they entered their second decade of marriage, both Penelope and Quincy noticed how many of their friends and acquaintances seemed worn down by parenthood. Children were expensive and demanding, and many couples seemed to exist more as co-parents than as partners. In contrast, Penelope and Quincy's relationship continued to grow stronger, their romance never fading into mere companionship. "We're lucky," Penelope said one anniversary evening as they danced in their living room to music from a music box Quincy had bought her. "We get to focus on each other, on our relationship in a way most couples can't." "It's not luck," Quincy said. "It's choice. We choose each other every day. We choose to make our marriage the center of our lives." "You think we're selfish?" she asked, not for the first time. "No," he said firmly. "I think we're living authentically. Not everyone needs to follow the same path. The world needs people like us too, people who can help others precisely because we're not overwhelmed by our own children." It was true. Over the years, they'd helped dozens of people in various ways. Their boarding house had been a refuge for travelers down on their luck, for women fleeing bad situations, for young men finding their way. Their home had welcomed Robert's children and countless others for meals and advice and support. They'd given money when people needed it, time when that was more valuable, and always kindness. "We've built a good life," Penelope said, resting her head on Quincy's shoulder as they swayed to the music. "A meaningful life." "The best life," he agreed. In 1890, 12 years into their marriage, Quincy fell from a particularly difficult horse and broke his arm badly. The doctor said it, but said he might never regain full strength in that arm. For a horse trainer, it was potentially devastating news. Penelope nursed him through his recovery, managing both their home and his business while he healed. She hired a young man to help with the physical aspects of training, and together they kept things running. Quincy struggled with feeling useless, with being dependent, but Penelope was patient and firm. "You've taken care of me for 12 years, she told him. "Let me take care of you now." His arm did heal, though not to full strength. But Quincy adapted, finding new techniques and focusing more on the teaching aspects of training rather than the physical breaking. His business didn't suffer. If anything, his reputation grew as his methods became more refined. "I was terrified," he admitted one night, his arm finally out of its sling. "Not of losing my business, but of becoming a burden to you." "You could never be a burden," Penelope said. "We're partners, Quincy. What affects one affects both. That's what marriage means." "I'm grateful we don't have children to support," he said quietly. "The financial strain would have been crushing, and I wouldn't have been able to focus on healing properly." Penelope nodded. "I thought the same thing. We have the freedom to adapt, to take time to recover because it's just us." "Just us," he echoed, pulling her close. "And that's still everything." As they approached their 15th anniversary, Penelope realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had made a comment about their childlessness. They'd become so established, so respected, that no one questioned their choices anymore. They simply were Quincy and Penelope, the couple with the boarding house and the horse business, known for their kindness and their devoted marriage. "We've outlasted the gossip," she told Quincy one evening. He laughed. "Or we've finally gotten old enough that people have given up on us producing offspring." "I'm 43, she protested. "That's not old." Tell that to my back after a full day of training, he teased, but then sobered. You know what I realized recently? I've been with you longer now than I spent wandering. You've been my home for longer than I had no home at all. That's a beautiful thing. You've been my home from almost the first day, Penelope said. I just didn't realize it immediately. Their 15th anniversary was a quiet celebration, just the two of them at a nice restaurant in town. Over wine and steak, they toasted to 15 years of marriage and talked about the future. What do you want for the next 15 years? Quincy asked. Penelope considered. More of this. More of us. Maybe travel a bit, see some of the places we've always talked about. Eventually slow down our businesses, spend more time together. That sounds perfect, Quincy agreed. No grand ambitions, just a continuing life together. Is that enough for you? She asked, old insecurities surfacing briefly. Just me still, after all these years. Quincy reached across the table and took her hand. Penelope Thompson, you have been enough for me every single day of our marriage. You'll be enough for me every day until I die. When are you going to finally believe that? I do believe it, she said, and meant it. Most days I do. Sometimes I just need to hear it again. Then I'll tell you again, he promised, as many times as you need to hear it. In their 17th year of marriage, Robert's oldest son, now a man of 24, asked Quincy to be his best man at his wedding. During the reception, he gave a toast that brought tears to Penelope's eyes. My Uncle Quincy and Aunt Penelope taught me what a strong marriage looks like, he said. They showed me that love isn't just about the early romance, but about choosing each other every day. About supporting each other through hard times, celebrating each other in good times, and never losing sight of why you fell in love in the first place. I hope my marriage to Sarah is even half as strong as theirs. Afterward, the young man hugged them both. Thank you, he said, for everything. For being there when my mother died, for all the summers at your house, for showing me how to be a good husband. We didn't do anything special, Quincy said. That's exactly it, his nephew replied. You just loved each other consistently and truly. That's everything. On the ride home, Penelope was quiet, processing the evening. Finally, she said, we made a difference even without children of our own. We were an example, a support system, a refuge when needed. That matters. It matters tremendously, Quincy agreed. We've touched a lot of lives, Penelope. Different than if we'd had children, but no less important. As they turned 50, both Quincy and Penelope began to slow down. They hired a manager for the boarding house, taking a less active role. Quincy trained fewer horses, being more selective about his clients. They spent more time traveling, visiting San Francisco and Sacramento, even taking a trip to Portland one summer. I'm glad we have the resources for this, Penelope said as they watched the ocean from a hotel in San Francisco. Glad we saved and invested instead of spending everything on children's clothes and education. No regrets, Quincy asked, though he knew the answer. None, she said firmly. You, none, he echoed. I've had a wonderful life, Penelope. Better than anything I imagined when I rode into Truckee that dusty day 22 years ago. Only 22 years, she marveled. It feels like I've known you forever. In all the ways that matter you have, he said. They returned to Truckee refreshed and ready for whatever came next. What came was a quiet, beautiful settling into their later years. They sold the boarding house eventually, deciding the management was more stress than it was worth. They kept their home and Quincy's business, living comfortably on his income and their savings. Quinn, Clara's son who'd been named after Quincy, grew into a fine young man who often sought their advice. He'd learned carpentry and helped them with repairs around their property, refusing to take payment. You helped my mother when she had nothing, he said. I can fix a loose step. Robert's children remained close, visiting often with their own children now. The house would fill with noise and chaos during these visits, and Penelope loved it. But she also loved when they left and peace returned. "Grandchildren would be exhausting," she said to Quincy after one particularly energetic visit. "They are exhausting just as grandnieces and nephews," he agreed. "I can't imagine having that energy level around all the time." As they entered their third decade of marriage, both in their 60s now, Penelope and Quincy spent their days in comfortable routine. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise. Work during the day, though less of it now. Evenings reading together, talking, sometimes just sitting in peaceful silence. "This is what I wanted," Quincy said one evening. "When I first met you, when I first dared to imagine a future, this is what I saw. Growing old with you, content and peaceful, even without children." Penelope asked, though the question held no anxiety anymore. "Especially without children," he said. "I wanted you, Penelope, just you, and I got exactly what I wanted." She kissed him then, sweet and lingering. "I love you, Quincy Thompson. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Penelope Thompson. Always have, always will." One morning in their 28th year of marriage, Penelope woke to find Quincy watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking about that morning before our wedding," he said. "When you told me you were barren, so afraid I'd reject you. And I remember thinking how foolish you were to worry, how obvious it was that you were everything I needed." "You saved me that day," Penelope said. "From a lifetime of thinking I was broken." "You were never broken," Quincy said, "just made differently for a different kind of life, our kind of life." "Do you think we would have been happy with children?" she asked curiously. Quincy considered. "Maybe. People adapt, and we might have found joy in it. But I don't think we would have been as happy as we've been. Our marriage has been our priority for 28 years. That's rare and precious." "I'm grateful it worked out this way," Penelope said. "Grateful for every choice that led me to you, including the one that made me barren in the first place." "Everything brought us here," Quincy agreed. "And here is exactly where I want to be." They rose and went about their day, the conversation settling into both their hearts like a benediction. They'd lived a good life, a meaningful life, exactly as they'd chosen it. Years continued to pass in gentle succession. Quincy's hair went completely gray, as did Penelope's, though she thought the silver suited him wonderfully. His hands developed arthritis, making horse training difficult, and he eventually retired fully, content to consult occasionally but mostly just enjoy his days. Penelope's boarding house had become a small hotel under the new owners, but they'd kept the name Harper House in honor of her aunt and her own legacy. She sometimes visited, seeing how things had changed and remained the same, feeling proud of what she'd built. On their 35th anniversary, Robert threw them a party at his ranch. The house was packed with 3 generations of family and friends, all celebrating this remarkable marriage. People gave speeches about how Quincy and Penelope had helped them, inspired them, shown them what enduring love looked like. 35 years is a long time, the preacher said, the same Reverend Matthews who'd married them, now ancient but still sharp. "But these two have made it look easy. They've shown us that a marriage built on mutual respect, genuine love, and shared purpose can weather anything." Quincy stood to respond, Penelope at his side. "It hasn't always been easy," he said. "We've had hard times like anyone, but we've had each other, and that's made all the difference." "Penelope, you've been my partner, my love, my home for 35 years. Here's to 35 more." Everyone cheered, though they all knew that was optimistic given their ages. But the sentiment was clear, the love between them undimmed by time. That night, alone in their bedroom, they lay together talking quietly. 35 years, Penelope marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday I stepped off that stagecoach. Best day of my life when you arrived in Truckee, Quincy said. I just didn't know it yet. Do you think we've lived a successful life? She asked. By any measure that matters, by every measure that matters, he said firmly. We've loved each other well. We've helped people. We've built something meaningful. We've been authentic to ourselves. What more could anyone ask? Children, she said, but there was no pain in it anymore. Most people would say children. Most people aren't us, Quincy replied. And our life has been full and rich and purposeful. Different doesn't mean less, Penelope. It just means different. I know, she said. I really do know that now. It took me years to believe it, but I do. Good, he said, kissing her forehead. Because it's true. As they entered their late 60s and early 70s, health issues began to arise. Quincy had a mild stroke that left him weakened for several months. Penelope developed problems with her joints that made movement painful some days. But they cared for each other through it all, patient and devoted. Quinn, now a grown man with his own carpentry business, checked on them daily. Robert's children visited weekly. The community they'd built over decades surrounded them with support, and they were never alone unless they chose to be. We're loved, Penelope observed one day as yet another friend dropped off a meal. We've given love for 40 years, Quincy said. It's coming back to us now. I'm glad we invested in relationships rather than just children, she said. Our community is so much broader. On their 40th anniversary, they celebrated quietly at home, just the two of them. Quincy had arranged for a special meal to be delivered, and they ate by candlelight in their dining room, the same room where they'd shared thousands of meals. 40 years, Quincy said, raising his glass. 40 years of waking up next to you, coming home to you, building a life with you. It's been the greatest honor of my life, Penelope. And mine, she said, tears flowing freely. You gave me everything, Quincy, not just love but belief in myself, purpose, home. You showed me I was enough exactly as I was. You were always enough, he said. I'm just glad I got to be the one to tell you. They talked long into the night, reminiscing about their decades together. The boarding house days, the early years of marriage, the challenges they'd overcome, the joy they'd found. Every memory was precious, every year a gift. As they prepared for bed, moving slowly with their aged bodies, Quincy pulled Penelope close. If I could go back and do it all again, knowing everything I know now, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the children we never had, especially not that, he said firmly. That gave us our life, Penelope. The one we chose, the one we wanted, the one that made us happy. Why would I change that? I love you so much, she whispered. I love you too, he said, always and forever. They made it to their 43rd anniversary before Quincy's health began to seriously decline. His heart was failing, and the doctor said it was only a matter of time. Quincy accepted this with the same quiet grace he'd approached everything, his only concern being for Penelope. You'll be all right, he said on a difficult night, lying in their bed with her beside him. You're strong, stronger than you think. I don't want to be without you, she said, crying. I know, but you will be, because that's how life works. And you'll be sad for a while, but then you'll remember how to live again. You'll remember everything we built together, everything we were to each other, and you'll carry that forward. How can you be so calm? She asked. Because I've had a wonderful life, he said simply. 43 years with you, doing exactly what I wanted to do, being exactly who I wanted to be. Not everyone gets that, Penelope. I'm grateful for every single day. Quincy Thompson died on a clear morning in March, with Penelope holding his hand and sunlight streaming through the windows. His last words were, I love you, and hers were the same. The funeral was enormous, testament to the lives they'd touched together. The church overflowed with mourners, people whose lives had been changed by Quincy's kindness or Penelope's generosity or their example of enduring love. Penelope sat in the front pew, surrounded by Robert's children and grandchildren, by Quinn and Clara, by Sarah and her family, by dozens of others they'd helped over the years. "He was the best man I ever knew," Robert said in his eulogy. "Not perfect, but good in all the ways that mattered." And his love for Penelope was the kind of love we should all aspire to: unconditional, unwavering, and true. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home and she was alone in their house, Penelope stood in the bedroom where Quincy had died. She looked at the bed they'd shared for over 4 decades, at his clothes still hanging in the wardrobe, at all the small signs of his presence. And she cried for everything she'd lost. But underneath, the grief was gratitude. Gratitude for 43 years of love, for a man who had seen her truly and loved her completely, for a life lived authentically and well. He had given her everything that mattered, and nothing could take that away. The months after Quincy's death were difficult. Penelope grieved deeply, missing him in every moment. But she had her community, the vast network of people they'd built relationships with, and they rallied around her. Quinn came daily to check on her. Robert's daughters brought meals and company. Friends visited and shared memories of Quincy, keeping his spirit alive. Slowly, painfully, Penelope began to find her footing again. She was 70 years old, widowed but still herself. Still Penelope, who had built a boarding house from nothing, who had loved and been loved remarkably well, who had lived a full life on her own terms. One day, nearly a year after Quincy's death, she was sorting through his things when she found a letter addressed to her. She recognized his handwriting, shaking as she opened it. "My dearest Penelope, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're still here missing me. I'm sorry for that, though I know death is part of life and there's no avoiding it. But I wanted to leave you with words, something to hold onto when the grief feels overwhelming. You were enough, Penelope. From the first day I met you until my last breath, you were more than enough. You were everything. And our life together, the one we built without children, without following anyone's expectations but our own, was exactly right. Don't ever doubt that. I know people will tell you that you should have remarried younger, should have given me children, should have done things differently. Don't listen to them. We lived a magnificent life, you and I. We loved deeply and were loved in return. We helped people, built community, made a difference in the world. That's not less than any other life. It's simply our life, and it was beautiful. Keep living, my love. Keep finding joy. Keep being the remarkable woman I fell in love with all those years ago. And know that, wherever I am, I'm grateful for every single day we had together. You were enough for me alone. You always were. You always will be. With all my love, forever, Quincy. Penelope cried reading the letter, but they were healing tears. She folded the letter carefully and put it in her dresser drawer where she could read it whenever she needed the reminder. Life continued. Penelope lived quietly, managing her own care and her own days. She visited with friends and family, kept up with her interests, found small joys in everyday moments. She thought about Quincy constantly, but with increasing peace rather than overwhelming grief. On what would have been their 45th anniversary, she visited his grave with flowers. "Hello, my love," she said, sitting on the bench nearby. "I'm doing all right, missing you, but all right. I wanted to tell you that I understand now, more fully than ever, what you tried to tell me all those years ago. I was enough. Our life was enough, different than what others chose, but no less meaningful. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for everything." The wind rustled through the trees, and Penelope smiled, feeling somehow that Quincy heard her. 3 years after Quincy's death, Penelope fell ill with pneumonia. At 73, her body struggled to fight it off. She knew her time was coming, and she faced it with the same grace Quincy had shown. Robert's children visited her in the hospital, as did Quinn and his family, as did dozens of others. "You've lived a remarkable life," Quinn told her, holding her hand. "You and Uncle Quincy both. You showed us what true love looks like, what a life well lived means. Thank you for that." "Take care of each other," Penelope said weakly. "That's what matters. Love well, be kind, live authentically. The rest will follow." On a spring morning 3 years and 2 months after Quincy's death, Penelope Harper Thompson passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family she and Quincy had built through love rather than blood. Her last conscious thought was of Quincy's smile, the way he'd looked at her that morning before their wedding when she'd warned him she was barren. "Then you're enough for me alone," he'd said, and she had been. She finally, fully believed that. She had been enough, their life had been enough, and she was at peace. At her funeral, Robert's oldest granddaughter, a girl of 15 who'd been named Penelope in her honor, read a poem she'd written about her great-aunt and great-uncle's love story. She spoke of how they'd chosen each other every day, how they'd built a life that was uniquely theirs, how they'd shown everyone around them that there were many ways to live meaningfully and love deeply. They didn't have children, the young Penelope concluded, but they weren't childless. They had all of us, everyone they helped and loved and inspired. And because of them, we understand that love takes many forms and a meaningful life looks different for everyone. We're all better because they lived and loved the way they did. Penelope was buried next to Quincy, their headstones side by side. Both stones bore the same inscription: "Beloved partner, faithful heart, more than enough." Years later, people still told stories about Quincy and Penelope Thompson, the remarkable couple who'd lived and loved so well. Young people facing pressure to conform would hear their story and find courage to choose their own path. Couples struggling with infertility would learn about them and find hope that a childless life could still be full and meaningful. Anyone questioning whether they were enough exactly as they were would hear how Quincy had loved Penelope and understand that enough was already everything. Their story became part of Truckee's history, a testament to the power of accepting yourself and finding someone who truly sees you. They'd had no children to carry on their legacy, but their legacy lived on anyway, in the hearts and lives of everyone they'd touched, in the example they'd set, in the love they'd shared so completely. It had been a beautiful life. Different than most, perhaps, but no less meaningful. Just as Quincy had promised Penelope on that day before their wedding, they'd been enough for each other alone, and that had been everything they needed. Their story was complete, their love was eternal, and their impact would ripple forward through generations who would remember that sometimes. Just being yourself, with someone who loves all of you, is the greatest success story of all.